sound silent. Silencio.
Wait, I gotta move the camera.
Okay. Beep, 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 beep. Do you want me to go closer? Or?
Two, 1, 2.
7, 8, 7, 8.
Okay,
Okay.
I think we are. In recording mode. I mean, look at this stupid sound.
Stupid.
This is slightly disappointing. I don't think I'll come back into this room again. It's bad. All right, so today we're talking all things culture.
Oh.
And hopefully we're going to fix the world.
Fix what? Fix the world?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Am I right? No, we're not going to fix the world. That's not why we're here. We're just here to have conversations.
We'll try and fix our world first.
We're trying to fix our own worlds, which we can't do without the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So we'll just let him fix us instead.
That's usually how it works, isn't it?
Yeah. As we surrender to him instead of trying to create the world in our image. We instead conform to his.
Oh,
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Here we go. It's been a while.
It
We haven't
has
even
been.
done a live stream in forever.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time we did it. It's like, geez, months and months ago.
May or June, I think.
Oh, really?
Yep. It's been pretty long.
Oh, wow. Okay. May, geez. That seemed so far away.
That's a very long time away.
Dang.
I think it was still. I mean, it was like almost 2-hour episode that we.
Oh, is that
Pretty
with
much.
Matt?
That
Or
was with Matt. That was
yeah,
last
okay.
time. But with the live stream, I think the live stream was.
Oh, that was on, yeah.
That was probably April. March, April.
Yeah. I think after May, it just got super busy for both of us.
Oh, it was insane.
Can't remember.
Crazy.
I don't
insane.
know what happened, and then it's just like middle of the year, and then everyone's just like, bam, get busy.
There it is. About 12th of May was the
12th
last
of May. Yeah, right.
one. I think you
But-
just moved in to
Yeah, with the beanie and the
get your funky
crazy
thing.
background curtain thingy.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Pretty fresh.
Pretty fresh.
Nothing bad about that. But we've been wow, these microphones sound a bit funny, to be honest. We've been obviously just sending each other messages.
Yeah, all the different things we're slowly getting aggravated about, or
Aggravated.
just really surprised, yet not surprised at the same time.
Yeah, I'm probably more surprised by how things are going, as well as pretty, I guess, not surprised at times
Yeah.
because of the ridiculousness of things. And I think that whole idea of just kind of staying close to the Lord brings it helps to clarify things and keep things into perspective. So,
Yeah.
because there's so much chaos around
Yeah.
that,
That's an understatement.
like, if you've planted your feet in anything outside of Jesus, I don't know how anyone is able to currently ride the waves of popular culture that are just coming in and thrashing people. So
Yeah.
one of, lately, I think this past 2 weeks, pastors at our church have been pretty much preaching on being ready, and being ready for the Lord, but also not succumbing to the cultural norms that are happening. And just listening to that, there's a little bit of urgency. We're going through the Gospel of Mark, and so we're near the end. It's like Jesus is saying, watch out, pay attention to wars, rumors of wars. These things will happen. You guys will be persecuted.
Yeah.
And people will think they're doing God a service when they start to kill you and they start to pretty much do all sorts of really disgusting things to you. But you just got to be aware that it will happen. And just keep trusting in God. So I was just kind of been keeping a watch on that. And I mean, as we message each other, all the things that are happening that are just seemingly ridiculous and yet acceptable, more like just publicized. Like if you go on the internet, it's all the extreme views that are publicized, get a lot of airtime. You don't necessarily hear from the
middle ground.
The middle ground.
Yeah.
They're just somewhere living their lives and being real instead of
No, yeah, it doesn't feel outrage, or it doesn't feel disdain, or it doesn't get attention, because the attention economy relies on extremes rather than normalcy, I guess you could say. From
absolutely.
And from what I guess we've been talking about.
Yeah, and there's a journalist who wrote about the fact that negativity sells. So that's probably why gossip columns still have so much. So many people that are like, yes, I will buy a subscription to that.
No, it's true.
Yeah. So extreme positions are being publicized at the moment. What are you seeing?
What am I seeing?
Yeah, from the right and the left. What positions specifically are you seeing publicized? I think I'm going to title this episode to something by the end of this chat. But what are you seeing?
What extremes are being publicized? Just like, it's kind of easy to just maybe pick one or two little topics, things.
Yeah.
On a bigger scale, I think the one thing that is constantly being thrown in your face, or the one thing that is constantly, not one thing, but the thing that I feel that's always the thing that you see on their Instagram reels and YouTube shorts and stuff, is the idea of maybe like, not a, how do we say it?
Don't worry, we'll get cancelled eventually.
I guess what
you trying to filter yourself?
What is getting more publicized, and maybe what is getting more popular these days, is the idea that I don't know if there's a phrase for it or if there's a word for it, but like individual. Well, I guess there is a phrase for it, but I'm trying to individual autonomy / wisdom, as in like. There's so many, like even Christians, like I was going through the roll of scroll of Instagram the other day, and I saw this chick talking about God. What was she talking about? She was talking about a scripture in the Bible somewhere, and she's just talking about it in the context of certain situations, but then just kind of slightly leaves out a little bit of context, and then I see that somewhere else as well on YouTube. I see that somewhere else on Facebook. But there's always these little, like, it's my perspective. It's my view on what the truth is, and my view on what reality is, and my view on what scripture is. And that feeling of constantly, that for me, the feeling of like, oh, that's kind of out of context, constantly keeps coming up, is scary. And I think the big thing that's being publicized at the moment is the truth and how it makes me feel is better than the truth and how it sets me free. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so even when we go into it, like it's, if one thing I've realized is just from our conversations and just things I've been watching is that you got to be very careful about going down your own way of getting caught up in this is my idea is truth rather than exposing yourself to actually what is real.
Yeah.
And the objective truth, because it's so easy to say, yeah, it's objectively true, but then you're like, you're way neck deep in it. Like, no, it's like you can't objectively see all the time. So it's, I think one thing I've been interested in recently, it's just trying to, for lack of a better word, trigger myself in different ways to figure out if what I'm thinking is actually the right thing in context of everything else. But everyone else online and what's been publicized constantly, like give the example of been watching a lot of commentary about like abortion, and I don't know if you saw Anne Hathaway's interview on The View.
I did
recently.
not. What happened?
She basically, I don't know if her view ever was about abortion in a good or bad or whatever her views were before then, but she basically came on and talked about the fact that abortion. No, she made the comment towards the end of the episode, something about the idea of like, oh well, you know, maybe abortion. You could maybe think of abortion as it's like a mercy thing for the, like a mercy for the mom or mercy for like it's
Wow.
like in a sense of like
Like an act of mercy?
act of mercy or something like that for the like you know, putting her through that if she doesn't want to or something like that. And I'm like,
Wow.
bro, there he is. Big man.
Hey, look at this. Hey, look at this. We're
Big
just
man
out
on
here
campus.
in the streets. Out here in the streets. And guess who we run into?
Oh my god.
A man walking in the streets.
Good looking rooster over here. Jump on in.
Welcome, Matt.
How we doing, lads?
Good.
Yeah,
good.
we're good. How you doing? Do you want some of my coffee?
No, I don't drink coffee, but I should just probably snort some.
Whoa.
Snort some coffee.
Today's topic.
You don't usually, or as in you never have, or?
I try it roughly, I think, once every 10 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Just don't like
That's
the taste of
discipline.
it.
I don't want to do. I don't want to do that to your heart. This is a mocha. It's coffee and chocolate put together without
The reason
sugar.
why I try is usually because I've got friends that are just coffee fanatics and they're just like, nah, that can't be true. So they keep on putting it in my face until eventually it gets down my gullet. And then I'm like, okay, no, I still don't like it.
No, I
It's
still
fine.
don't like it.
They just look at me strange.
I loathe it more. No, you don't have to. Last person I tried to get a coffee for, he went a little bit overboard. Okay, here's what happens. He's like, oh, I think he had a taste of my mocha or something like that. He's like, wow, I like that. So he went and got another one. He had 2 flipping coffees. I'm like, dude, you got to pace yourself. He was shaking. I was like, no.
Oh
So that scared him off pretty good.
I had 3 cups, maybe 4 cups of tea. I was doing like an interview, but the guy
Of tea.
was like a friend. It was
Yeah.
like a job interview. And yeah, the black tea, and by the end of it, I was pinging. I was like, why can't I sit still in this chair? I must be really excited for
Where's my ADHD medication?
Afterwards,
Did I take it? Did
I
I?
had to walk. I had to walk it off. It was the weirdest thing. I didn't know tea could do that.
Yeah, tea is like a slow release caffeine
Yeah.
and is also like so good for your mental health.
Yeah.
It's a lot better because your calming down is like, obviously you had a few cups in a short. You must have been thirsty.
I think I was just not realizing what I was doing because I was so into the interview. It was over Skype.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
COVID, and I was just like, I think I've got this job. And the funny thing was, it was like we were just catching up, and he's like, "You want to do an interview?" And I was like, "What? Like right now?" He's like, "Yeah, sure."
Let me get my tea.
I just made too much of it, and I just kept drinking it. I think, yeah,
Yeah, brilliant.
but I never really drank tea or coffee growing up, and then I thought, I think it was a girl I liked really loved tea, so I was like, I'm gonna try and get into tea now, and And so I did. But coffee, I still can't handle the taste.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna push that agenda on you.
I had a weird last 48 hours. That's probably why as well. So I usually work 5 hours on a Friday.
Yeah.
And something happened, so they asked me, they begged me if I could do like an extra 5 hours. So I did a double.
Wow,
Wow.
double
While I was
shifts.
doing it, something else went wrong, and so they needed me to work another 4 hours.
Oh.
So
Mm.
the
Oh.
shift turned into a 14-hour shift.
Oh, wow.
Dang.
And then
Wow.
you know how I double booked today as well.
Yeah.
So
That-
I'm getting home and like it's almost midnight, and I'm putting the devotion together for the staff meeting for this morning.
Oh, you had to put a devotion together too.
Jeez.
Oh, God bless
So
you, Matt.
we did that.
Oh my goodness.
Devotion is done. The boss is happy for that job, and the boss for the other job is happy. And
Nice.
yeah, but I apologize.
And now you're here
Normally I don't
in pieces. Right off the streets.
wish I
So
drank
good.
coffee.
There's a vending machine. Do you want me to get you something? Do you drink energy drinks?
Nah, they're weird.
That's very interesting. All right.
Like
I would have slapped you across the face if you didn't drink coffee, and then you drunk
Oh,
drinks. I'd been like,
That's why I don't know. I just don't like the taste of those either.
okay,
Too picky.
yeah. But there is a vending machine if you
I'll pop out. I just realized as I rocked up, I was like, I forgot to bring a water bottle.
bottle.
Yeah, go for it.
Should be fine.
Yeah, it's all good, bro. Just in and out, in and out. It's a
Yeah.
free street, as you can see all these people.
Free.
Yeah, I'm surprised I got here so quick. Actually, it was good.
It was, oh wow, that is pretty good from Fremantle.
Yeah.
Oh, from Freo. Jeez.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hectic. Did you get out like on 9?
Well, I told him I was like, I'm done. Done the devotion, and he's like, nah, it's cool. So,
Oh,
the meeting
no.
kind of goes from 8 to 9, and then we kind of just, I guess it's fellowship.
Fluff around.
Yeah, we fluff around. We've got some cool things in the works, but we got everything sorted meeting wise by the end of 9.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
Awesome. That's pretty good.
Sick.
All right. Well, let's do
You
this.
guys been? Did you like solve world hunger?
Well, we were getting to
Almost.
solve how we get a guy to come off the street and just join
Yeah.
us. No,
Almost got it.
that's
Almost.
literally what we're passing it off as. No. Go grab your water bottle and come back
I
and
don't
we'll.
have a bottle.
Oh, I have a spare water
I'll
bottle.
probably have some in the car actually.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll be quick.
Yeah. We'll catch you up when you come back in on what's going on. Right off the street, Matt. Everybody. Woo! We're just a bunch of hooligans.
Hooligans.
That's all we are.
Oh,
so-
just a comment. Could you pick him up on the mic? Because I don't know. It could barely kind of.
No, I didn't pick up a lot, but we are going to have to change that. So you were talking about abortion?
Yeah, I was just talking about the idea of how.
Well,
like,
you weren't. Anne Hathaway was.
Anne Hathaway was talking about abortion. I guess going back to the idea of like what's being kind of publicized a lot more is personal truth is more important than objective and actual truth. It obviously, which is not something new, but yeah, I don't know. It's been interesting to observe, and I was just thinking about the idea of culture generally now, and comparing myself to thinking when I was a teenager or coming to the late teens, about to go into my 20s. Culture and the way everything was positioned was very much, there was to a certain degree a structure about it. There's a kind of a structured expectation about like, okay, you're going to go to uni or you're going to get a trade. Like it is still now these days. But with the, like, I guess there's like so many more options now for kids to kind of work or to get money or to do other things. It's kind of left, even it's filtered into maybe Christian culture as well, where it's just like left everything kind of ambiguous, and almost people now starting to interpret things for themselves rather than try to seek out what is the actual truth about how to discipline my life. Like when Matt was talking about coffee and stuff, like I can't imagine growing up in this generation and trying to find my identity and then hearing all these voices like we did when we were younger, but like there's such a heavy wave of if you don't do this, like, it's not that you will just be hated by your friends, but you can almost be hated by like a whole group of people rather than just a one or two, which lends itself to then kids going into the idea of like, what's the use of living? And I don't know, I just thinking about how different my perspective on Christianity and culture was back then to now. It's just like that term, it's like the fluidity of it now is really, really scary.
Yeah.
How it's just so like back in the day, you could kind of almost grasp the certain things at certain places, like the church, or like these certain events or things that occur every year. That okay, this is a solid foundation of where I can find truth, a solid foundation of where I know I can find hope and a balance.
Yeah.
Whereas now, it's like you step on everything. It's like wet, soggy ground. Like you can just sink into something that might not even be true, but it's all you got at the moment.
That's
I don't
true.
know if that makes sense.
No, it does make a bit of sense. So Matt, we're just talking about what, obviously our first point, the extremes. I had you muted, by the way, earlier for some reason. I don't know what it was. That's why I couldn't pick
what I
you.
was saying.
No one heard what you were saying. You're just going to look like a blabbering.
You guys just sound like crazy people. Who's this guy off the street?
No, we got you on camera. So. Yeah, absolute silence.
Welcome, world. Oh, I can.
Well,
I can hear
welcome.
my voice.
Yeah,
in my
I can
ears.
hear your voice too.
Interesting.
In my ears.
Yeah. It's trippy.
No, you just want to catch Matt up, as well.
Oh,
I'm just gonna
It sounded
do
like
some.
you were describing
technical stuff.
quicksand.
oh, we were just yeah,
Yeah.
we were talking about the idea of like what's being more publicized in media, or what's kind of the big thing in the context of what JL sent to me was the idea of what is it? You think of the story of Nineveh,
Yes.
and
Oh yeah, that's right. That was one of the talking points. I thought
Yeah.
that was an interesting choice.
the faith in Nineveh, the extremes of both right and left, and just what the question was like, what's being more publicized now? What are you seeing? Sorry. What was the exact question? Sorry.
Yeah, what are you seeing happen in terms of this whole thing about the? What are you seeing about all of these extreme sort of spaces being more publicized,
Yeah.
especially online? Because a lot of people, well, most of us are living online these days, and so whatever is being pushed on, what is it you're seeing? Because one of the things that I've realized is that the middle, if you call it the middle, is not necessarily present in the public discourse. Maybe that's
Yeah.
what I would call the public discourse, the town hall. you
There's
know.
a kind of irony in that everybody thinks they're in the middle.
Oh, yeah.
There's always someone more left or more right than you.
That's
There's
right.
always someone
And
extreme.
stuff them.
No one ever says, I'm the extreme one. Nobody, right?
Yeah.
Because
Very true.
everybody falls into this way of thinking of, well, I'm not really that. I must be, maybe into the middle, or
Yeah.
middle left, middle right, middle whatever.
Which is perfect because like that's what Nate has been talking about. He's been saying like we've it's become a very individualized and like a personal truth has become more of the
Yeah.
kind of moral compass that
Yeah,
we're
more of
going
the
with,
moral
especially
compass.
even with the interpretation of scripture, which is one of those spaces that he's talking into with the Christian circles, is that there'll be a reading of a scripture, and then the interpretation is very much removed from the context of it because there's other parts of that scripture that are left out, and so it's like here's my truth that I'm getting from and understanding it. So it's very much
I'm always super allergic to that phrase.
Sorry.
My truth.
you're allergic to it.
Oh yeah.
I'm so sorry. I don't have an EpiPen, but I did my first date.
It's such. Do you guys ever get like
Yeah,
allergic to that?
It's
Oh,
really
yeah.
interesting, isn't it? That phrase is so
My truth.
my truth.
What'd you say?
What you talking
I
about?
chew-
Exactly. What is Willis talking about?
But it's So what was it?
It's kind of, for me, it's like the flag
Mm.
phrase that sums up the very significant time in history where there's a breakdown, a very serious breakdown in communication. Language is
That's a good
broken
point.
at that point. When you say my truth, that's not an oxymoron. That's actually a revelation of a deeper truth, in that we don't know how to communicate. We don't know how to use words appropriately. We don't care about etymology. We don't care about the certain baggage that might actually be destroying the words that we're trying to use to express ourselves. And it's really unhelpful, because it stops us from concretely understanding each other. We start to assume more and more that we understand each other, and we actually get farther
actually
away
don't.
from encountering the thing that we were trying to express.
Mm.
So my truth is a dumb statement, and I wish more people said that. But at the same time, I do appreciate when people say it, that they're trying to talk about their narrative. They're usually talking about this journey that they've been on. It's not completely inaccurate in expressing what they're trying to do. It's just there's another way. There's another way of expressing that, and it's just as equally relevant, but it's more accurate if you do it the other way. Because when we keep on denoting truth as something that's subjective and only subjective, that's when we get into a lot of problems.
Got a few problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same with left and right. Like, we break down the communication not only between them, but in them. And then people don't understand what left or right actually is. It's just people describing something that they think it is, that other people have used it. But the actual set clear boundaries of what those things are, the characteristics of what they are, start to become very nebulous, and people start to misunderstand, assume again, and then it just goes on and on from there. So people get farther away from actually talking to each other. It's not so much that they have extreme views, it's that their views are so extremely off in their expression that nobody understands each other anymore. That's part of it. It's not all of it,
so
but it's part of it.
It's very true. And I was thinking about something similar myself, that with this whole idea that to not fall into that weird mentality of, right versus left always, but to also see to see where I would naturally fall into. Just trying to think about what I think about and why I think about what I think about, which has to do with, like, maybe a socialist might be able, a social scientist might be able to say that perhaps there are some people that are generally leaning towards a more conservative type of framework with their mindsets, or it might have to do with that as well as culture and the space where they were brought up in, whatever it is. But I just did a little bit of self-observation, and I was like, I would tend to want to believe in something more concrete, kind of maybe a need for certainty. I don't know if that's, though I'm like a highly adaptable individual and I like spontaneity, I'm on the artistic, creative spectrum, which is like there is no solid ground. As well as I'm on the other spectrum where, like, I actually want to have solid ground for things. So just that kind of self reflection to look at and to go, okay, like what is it for me with the ideas and the ideologies that I hold? Because I can fall into that. I can go, yeah, everybody else is liberal. I'm conservative. Like, y'all are over there, and sort of thing. But then also looking at my practice and my application, I'm like, okay, I seem to have this kind of, not so conservative, but I would call more dogmatic. Like, I would tend to lean to what's concrete, unbiased. Like, I don't want it to be based on me, though I personally have a vested interest in it, in something being concrete. But on the practical side, it's I work it out based on this. Like, my vision is it's not necessarily utopia, though it might be like a utopian, which brings us into another into another can of worms. But my practice is because I already have this idea of what reality, truth is supposed to be like. I guess the difference is that that's not necessarily coming from me, because a lot of the truth that I believe and a lot of the ideologies that I hold don't necessarily ring well with my flesh. They don't necessarily ring well with, with what I want to do every single day. Left to my own devices, I'll probably not be a very kind and and because that's the other thing as well. I think that goes with this. I've been thinking about it with how we think we can then become the reason for the describer of reality, and then take our interpretation of things to mean everything. I think that one of the things that as well is connected to that, I'm losing my train of thought as I'm thinking about it.
It's
It's
It'll
hilarious.
make sense eventually.
It will make sense eventually. So not just in practice, but there it is. I think we have this also underlying belief that people start at neutral, which biblically is not accurate.
Neutral,
you-
neutral in what way? Can
Like
you,
you,
I
we
think I understand.
our
what you mean, I just
nature,
wanna
our
double check.
nature starts at neutral.
Uh-huh.
And then we've had the world paint stuff on us,
Mhm.
and then there's a level of innocence that we're all born with and we grow with, we grow up with. But it's at that, at the level, it's going like your nature is actually neutral. Some people used to say good, some people do say good, but your nature, you will naturally veer towards good or towards neutrality. And so, when I think I sent you both that little paper that I was writing on, putting my thoughts on. It had to do with that. Is that the reason why? I think you said it as well. The reason why people don't necessarily care that much when you invoke the word sin or wrongdoing. It's like no one cares. Like that's.
You didn't send me this.
Did I say? Did I not?
This is like the dog
What?
video all over again. You're talking for like 5 minutes. Like, hang on, wait a minute. I don't care. I love it. Okay, cool.
But
Okay, so
yeah,
that's,
so
that-
and
that's-
you've written, and it's talking about neutrality. It's talking about nature. It's talking about
Like how do we? So if I'm gonna, for example, look at a Bible verse and then not allow the Bible to, like a mirror, judge me, and instead look at it and go, yeah, I'm pretty good. Like James says, I come up to the mirror and I go, I think I'm doing pretty well. And then get out and change nothing because I've kind of reasoned in my mind that there's nothing wrong with me. It means I have started, to an extent, there's the part of that says that I've started from neutral. I at least think of myself, not necessarily as good, but I think of myself as in a neutral space. I'm not a bad person. So
That's
and
why
I-
benchmarks are so significant, especially when we talk about anything morality based. A weird example: when we're kids, everything seems huge, and if we have the fortune of going back to a place that we used to live, when we're older, we're just like, look at how small this place is.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
weird. It's too small,
Yeah.
because it doesn't feel as big. So there's something going on with our perception, and that's why we need benchmarks, because it helps us to see things from outside of ourselves. It's a different kind of mirror altogether. right?
absolutely.
And so there are certain things that we struggle to perceive and understand and reflect on, especially when it comes to our internal sense of self.
Yeah.
And so that's why morality is an interesting one. It wasn't really that bad, and you start to break it down, and you might have
Yeah.
a different opinion by the end of it.
Yeah.
It might be that you're actually still thinking of the mindset that you haven't done anything that bad. It might be a cultural thing. It might be something of a difference of opinion, or it might just be something you really do strongly believe in. But then other times you do break the thing down. You go, hang on, there's some mystery here as to why I did these things. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe my motive was doing multiple things at the same time, and there was more to the story. And actually, well, actually, maybe I was doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So that's the benefit of benchmarks. And if we don't have them, it becomes much trickier. That's why, interestingly enough, a mirror, that's a really interesting object and metaphor, because it's supposed to be a benchmark.
Yeah.
You know, but at the same time, it's a tricky one because we might be looking at the wrong mirror.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Very true. Very true. Yeah. So, I think, even thinking about this, because there's a lot of controversial topics that are sort of bringing this up, I guess, in the public town square, that are, I think for me, just showing that there's definitely an extent to which we all, have been discipled by the Enlightenment because of what happens in us when our idea of what's real and what we think about and how we interpret what has been held, for example, in our tradition by the church for over 2,000 years, with regards to these controversial topics, which, in some spaces they got it right, in some spaces they got it wrong, but there are certain things that are key. It shows up in how easily people then get offended. Because
What do you mean? Explain.
so when we have a certain way that we look at the world,
Mm.
and then an opposing way or a different perspective comes along, without benchmarks, I can be my own judge of what's right.
Mm.
And so, however, when you bring a different perspective that challenges my worldview, then I've got a few things that I've got to do. Either I shift,
Mm.
or in what we see sometimes is that there's the more extreme, like I'm not going to accept that. It doesn't fit. I'm just not going to take it. And so
Mm.
part of that seems to be with the rise of the atomized individual trying to become gods in our own self, thinking high of our thoughts. That's why I love things like You Are Not Your Thoughts.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
like You Are Not Your Ideas. But also there's the side of it which, the other side of it, which is that we kind of like to take things for granted as a result of this, and we don't necessarily think through. Like, if we start to dig deep, we don't really know what's at the bottom, because there is no bottom,
Stop at the first offense.
right?
Yeah.
And so then instead it's like reactive.
Mm.
And so I think I see a lot of cognitive incongruence or cognitive dissonance as well that's happening as an after effect of this. And offense is probably maybe just one of those ways we try to protect ourselves.
It's interesting, isn't it? That is very interesting.
I'm just throwing some thoughts out there. What's your thoughts?
Being offended is a way of describing a certain kind of experience, but it's summing up quite a lot all at once.
Yep.
Am I offended by the idea? Am I offended by the fact that this person believes this thing, and that the relationship's important, and I don't want this person to be believing that thing? Is it implications of how it's going to affect other people that I care about maybe as well? So there's a lot going on there in regards to the social.
Yeah.
Is it more so to do specifically with that first point with like the idea? Is it more intellectual?
Well, I think definitely more
And so it can
the
hit us
ideas. Yeah.
from different angles.
Yeah.
And it probably is a lot on the idea level, but I think we sometimes forget that the same way that we can get offended is the same way that we can get convinced of something as well. It hits on these different kind of levels. That's why some of the really good apologists have figured that out and have noted, the stumbling blocks for people being convinced or, being further offended have got to do with the fact that the person doesn't need more intellect. It's actually they need more of the personal or the social or, whatever it might be. And there's actually quite a few layers to it. So there's a few ways in which people can get offended, a few ways people can get convinced of something.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if they're the polar opposites of each other, but that's kind of what's happening in my head at the moment as I'm thinking about it. So, yeah, being offended is an interesting one because there's a lot going on all at once.
Definitely. Yeah. And people, I think maybe people have become, or so have connected more of their identity to ideas, to the extent that the ideas are pulling them. Versus, it used to be different. I think when we talk, in the church and communally, I'm thinking about the amount of people that would challenge me on something. On I used to have, I didn't used to. He's still alive and well, a friend. Very early on, we'd read the Bible together, and whenever I'd be, questioning something because I was going through a hard time, he'd just be like, "Nah, don't be silly." And I was like, "How insensitive of you." I'm going through something here. This is my reality.
Oh my God.
Yo, I had some stuff going on,
Yeah.
Not only the hardship of going through the suffering that I was going through, but then like this temptation to be offended, to be like, hey, like, no, understand my situation. Like we're reading the Bible and he'd just be like, come on, dude, like look what he wasn't insensitive. It was more like he wouldn't allow me to continue to entertain certain thoughts that were subjectively real, but objectively not helpful in the long term.
See, that's the thing. What you just did there is pure gold. When you're able to express clearly the ideas in such a way that another person can properly understand it, as opposed to just the my truth statement, right?
Yeah.
So you've now kind of helped us to understand what it is that you're talking about and how it's in relation to you as well.
That's right.
That's super helpful.
Yeah.
It's almost like we've dumbed that out. We've done the whole 1984 thing where we've just started deleting words, and it's only
we have. It's not like we did. It's like that's literally what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Like
The
incredible.
comment you made earlier about the Grand something day, was it Grand Friends Day?
Oh yeah. Have you heard of this? Grandparents' Day, which was a few days ago.
Babushka.
Babushka, the what?
Dadushka. That's my grandfather.
Babushka Dadushka? Or Dadushka?
Babushka is grandma. It's Russian. Like the dolls.
Babushka. I've heard that sound. I've heard that
It's a
before.
grandmother doll, and you keep on popping it open. Until you see the tiny little kid.
Do you shout Babushka every time
It's
you...
all the different
So
generations.
it's literally called a grandma.
Oh,
That's
so
cool.
that's the actual context.
Da, my little,
We just-
my
we
little
just-
DS.
That actually makes sense.
He's
why
a
they're
Russian doll.
actually makes sense with that name.
Yeah.
We give that
Dang.
as toys to kids now. It's like, no. Oh, wow. That's
That's
incredible.
actually a pretty
I didn't know that
symbol.
either. Like I think I only found that out because of my Russian friends. They told me that, and I was like, oh, I feel like an idiot. But yeah.
Right?
But nobody gets told that, so we don't know. We just
Actually
think
makes
it's a funny
sense with
doll.
like it's a
Yeah, well,
generational thing.
That's it.
Dang.
Yeah.
What?
And
thought it
it's
was
so
just a cool
simple,
little thing.
right? It's so simple, isn't it?
Wow.
For me, it was fun because like when I went over there, they have all these different novelty things, and one of my brothers is like really into Chicago Bulls, so I bought him like this babushka doll of like the entire team. I think the smallest one was Dennis Rodman with the floated in it. It was so dope, so dope.
That's so good.
Babushka. And it's such a it would
So-
be such a simple way to like teach kids,
Yeah,
Yeah. Like
Dang.
you think about the
the
repercussions of
connection
that.
where
Like,
they come from.
like you were in mom was in grandma, like that's pretty much what it is.
What the heck?
Because what is it? I think my wife told me, she's like, I'm every single girl is born carrying their grandchildren.
Wow.
And you go, that's so true.
Anatomically not, but that's a good
It's really,
thing.
like they're born
it's
with all
true.
the eggs they'll ever
yeah,
have.
yeah.
And that's it.
Well, that's technically, yeah, you're right. Okay. But more deeply or metaphorically, it's very interesting, isn't it? It's very profound.
Oh, insanely profound. Like if you actually think about the intentionality of that, I mean, there is so much there to be talked about.
Because we probably lost our connection to the tradition. Tradition's like almost like a old antiquated word that people kind of just go, oh, that's traditional. And it's like, but wait a minute. Most of the things that we have that hold us up as a society are actually some form of tradition. I think I got roasted by one of my lecturers at seminary when I wasn't using the word properly. And then he pointed out how the Bible is technically a tradition. I was like, what? How is the Bible a oh, right, because it's been passed. Oh, wow. So it started to help me understand just how significant and how widespread tradition is. But I've led us on a weird tangent because we were talking about Grandparent Day.
It was,
and then
That's
we
how
went
we roll.
It was an
about
incredible
babushkas.
rabbit trail.
So
Babushka!
apologies. Babushka. Duh,
I just love shouting that out. Well, yeah, like, but it is part of the conversation because of the loss of tradition, the loss of biblical
Actually, yeah.
interpretation, that's been passed down, is what gets us in this space where, with the rejection, ignorance of what has been passed down, we're left to fend for ourselves for what meaning is supposed to be. And so it leaves us in this space where we're like, what else have I got on apart from relying on myself and my truth and my whatever? I was reading a John Tyson book where it's called Intentional Father. I might have mentioned it before, but he talks about how dads were supposed to actually help their sons craft their identity by telling them, this is our family, this is how we serve the world. We have a certain set of, we have a calling on our lives. So you had the Levite priests who could never be anything else but that. You were born in if you're at least male, in the Levite family, and your aim was to be serving in the temple. You had a purpose. That's what you had. And so, but imagine what we tell to our kids these days. You can be anything you want to be. Imagine the amount of pressure that is to just go, so what should I be? You got no experience. You don't really know you haven't lived. You don't know what's real necessarily, how to sort out through what's real, how to sort out through all these different mirrors, which one is actually reflecting back to you the accuracy of what reality is. Yeah.
That's why the first 20 years of your life, you're really thinking your parents' thoughts.
Yeah.
Right. Even if you don't like them, you're still
thinking that.
Because that's the only mirror. That's the only benchmark that you have. And then as you start to get older and you start to go through different developmental periods, as your personality emerges more, as you're around different social kind of constructs, then you start to notice other people, their ideas. And it becomes more and more of a pull on different structures. Remember there was one theologian that he used this term that has stayed with me. I think it's so clever. He calls them plausibility structures. Because that's a really helpful way of thinking about it. It's not just simply a structure of, what you're thinking and believing and stuff like that. He uses the word plausibility. And that's a good way of thinking about how we put together our beliefs. Because when we're talking about beliefs, we're usually talking about presuppositions, right? And if we're talking about something that we can't prove that we later on go on to believe that impacts all these other things that we believe, then the presuppositions are always something that are either plausible or implausible. Are they possible? And then once it's possible, is it likely? And if it's likely or more likely than another presupposition, then there you go. You've chosen a presupposition. Yeah. You've got a belief. Yeah. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that all filters down to an individual, especially when they're very young. A young individual, their brain actually is still developing. So what are they doing? Well, they're listening to beliefs around them, and they're seeing how they function. And they go, okay, this holds water, this works. Mum and Dad says this, so it must be true because, well, it seems to work. And so from young age, you have that kind of picture. And then that's kind of why some kids, have these really funny fights at school. It's like, Mum and Dad said this, though, and you were saying this, and, and the teacher might, have a different view as well. So all of a sudden, you've got these really funny little things that are going on, especially in primary school and then in high school. But the big one comes when you get to that period outside of school, especially when you get into your 20s. Yeah. Because in your 20s, you've now not got your parents in your ears all the time. You still have them, like, bouncing around the echo of them, right? And maybe it's not your parents, maybe it's, you know, other people in your younger
Significant
years,
people.
but significant
Yeah.
people. That's right. But in your 20s, you start to choose your social groups more, right? That's transitioned to a point where you're spending a lot more time with those particular groups than you are with your family. So now it's a different collection of thoughts that are a benchmark. And some people just don't realize, especially in their 20s, I'm just believing everything my friends say.
Pretty much.
We always go on about how
Yeah.
we're, you know, forming ourselves. And I think it was something you said last time. It's like, no, we're actually being formed one way or the other. I think you said we're being formed by that which is around us.
Pretty much, yeah.
And we've become less aware of that, I think, which is really problematic. You really want to be thinking about what's impacting your thoughts, what's actually shaping your narrative, the way that you see yourself. These benchmarks that you kind of compare your younger self to. Because that's how you learn if you've gone through a milestone or not. You go, well, the younger me couldn't do that.
Yeah.
But I can.
Maturity.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You know, I've
Maturity.
changed.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something to think about. Goodness.
Yeah.
So plausibility structure. I really like that little
Plausibility
phrase.
structure.
It's very, very helpful
Plausibility
for me at least. And he used it quite a lot when he was talking about pastoral theology. It's one of the reasons why sometimes when people go to university, they have a huge, you know, clash of conviction, and they might come out with a very different worldview by the end of it because they're around other structures of belief that are plausible. So they have to kind of really figure out what they're going to believe by the end of it.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, going back, what Nate said in our last sort of get together had to do with the narratives. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, the stories
That
of
we
belief.
believe.
Yeah.
And that has come back over time and time again. And I've been trying to think through that and trying to think about, like, what do we tell ourselves about what's happening around us? So essentially, it's another way of saying these are plausibility structures. They help us to order the world around us.
It's a whole approach to therapy that's called narrative
Narrative therapy.
narrative therapy, and it's focusing on that kind of idea.
Well, maybe you were doing some narrative therapy with us before.
Stories are very important. It's just realized over time.
Yeah. After you said it, I just kept hearing it over and over again from different spaces. And it was like, I don't know, just like a veil got torn off. And I'm like, this is why so-and-so leaves. Oh, well, there is a story behind why so-and-so leaves like this or like that. Now, to try and figure that out, that's a more super important part. It's because that's people's...
it's a lot of unpacking.
Yeah, you know, it needs to be unpacked. So, and so I was pretty intrigued as well about this idea of forgiveness. Okay, because I've heard it. I don't know if you remember Debbie, our learning support girl. She talks about forgiveness. And someone in my church has said forgiveness is like the oil, you know, in relationships. Like it just smooths things over. But
forgiveness does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't thought that specific statement through. But forgiveness is one of those things. And, you know, and Tim Keller is just releasing a book on it. Not too long. He talks a little bit about how it's important in communities of faith to have forgiveness, to practice it appropriately. He also used it in the context of how we, especially evangelical churches, deal with abuse, and then how forgiveness is part of that conversation, and how we introduce forgiveness in that conversation. Where there's a sort of level of accountability, how it works in relationships. And so I guess this is one of the things where I kind of want to hash it out a little bit, because we have a probably less settled world, is probably what I would call it. We're not as connected to our traditions as we were, and so that creates a sense of maybe part of the offense that we feel sometimes is trying to protect ourselves, and so we tell ourselves certain things about the world that will help us help us sleep better at night, maybe.
Mm.
Offense is a very interesting thing in that on a very personal level,
Mm.
we might, and even unconscious level, feel as if the thing that is offending us is a thing that is threatening
Oh yeah,
our sense of
absolutely.
truth.
Truth, being,
Right. Mm-hmm.
wholeness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
so
agree.
that's why it's interesting when I see some people debate with others, and I'm seeing these very intense, well thought out ideas being, put forth that they might, strongly disagree with.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, how are they speaking so calmly? Okay, they've practiced, I guess, and things like that, but still, on some level, can they not just be upset? Why are they not upset? And it's because there's a certain calm, simple confidence that the things that are being put out aren't going to destroy them. The ideas that are in that kind of platform, the other person, debating their perspective, even though they vehemently disagree with them, they're able to speak dispassionately because they are not just simply coming at it only purely intellectually. It's like, come on, like it's almost impossible to do that.
Yeah.
There's always some aspects of
Parts
ourselves
of
that
us,
come
yes.
in to the mix as well. It's the fact that they're calm, they're confident. Their confidence isn't in themselves; it's in the idea that they possess. In contrast to this other one that's being put forth, and so they can sit there and not get too offended. They might still be offended, but they're not being so threatened that they can't respond to it. In fact, they're responding to it with a great amount of energy in their mind so that they can think very clearly, because it is very difficult to think when you're feeling too threatened, right?
Yes.
Your amygdala turns on,
It
your
turns
body
off
reroutes your
everything
power,
else. Yeah.
your memory's out the window. It's just like, it's very hard to
Very
think.
true.
But for these people, when they're debating, it's like, no, they can do it. Why? I used to think it was just because of practice, but more and more I've started to realize, with the help of some of my friends who really like apologetics and things like that, it's actually the fact that they're quite grounded in the truths that they believe.
Groundedness. We keep going back to it, but that's so true. So yeah. So let's talk about the definition of, let's talk about forgiveness and, biblical forgiveness. And on a very real level, I'm aware that for Jesus, this is a really important matter in teaching us how to pray. This is one of the things that maybe sometimes gets glossed over. We probably need to spend a lot more time in our communities, but it's the forgive us as we forgive others aspect, and then clarifying that with, if we don't forgive others, our Heavenly Father will not forgive us, which makes it a matter of utmost importance, because he later on then also talks about the love of many will grow cold, talking about end days. Offense will be high, we'll betray each other, love of many will grow cold. Where there's a lack of love, generally, it's easier to get offended, obviously, when there's a lack of love. As you just said, which means I think part of that is that forgiveness becomes super hard to do.
Because if you're not calm, if you're not grounded, if you're not secure in the relationships that you have and the truths that you live by, the promises that you're seeking, the opposite of that is more and more threatenedness, which means more and more defenses, which means more and more closed off aspects to yourself and to others, and more chaos, right? So of course you're not going to be, more loving. Of course that love's going to grow cold. I see it all the time in couples therapy.
Yeah, it's very true.
And I see the complete opposite of it when there's forgiveness.
So what is it? Talk about it.
What
is forgiveness?
The reason why I asked you to talk about this on this particular podcast is because that's a favorite.
Do you need to forgive me or something?
I do, yeah. No. I could have said some funny things then, but I won't. I was fascinated by this topic for a long, long time. It touches on one of my favorite parables of the Bible, which is the very first sermon that I ever preached, which I really enjoyed. And then on top of that, I was preaching in April of this year when, unfortunately, I got quite sick, and I also had like a breakup the day before I was set to preach as well. So it was just like an absolute mess. And the illness, I wasn't sure if it was actually going to kill me or not, because at that time it was possibly a disease that would kill me. So it was terrifying, all at once, the day before I'm preaching. I was like, okay, yep, I'm checking out. I'm gonna call somebody and ask if they possibly can hand the ball. And they were very, very lovely about it. My church is just beautiful.
Good job, Dave.
And so,
Too soon. Keep going.
but then, so I'm going to preach it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I got to wait a while. And so they slot me in. And so I've got this sermon in my bones ready to be preached on forgiveness. And I got to wait months and months and months. And I'm supposed to do it 2 weeks ago. What do I get? COVID.
Yeah, that's
doing the
right.
rounds again.
Finally joined
Yep.
the crew.
Yep. Finally joined
You're
the
welcome.
COVID gang. And so I, which I'm very grateful that I was, my body and all the things that kind of has happened in the last 2 years, I was able to kind of handle it fairly well. Because obviously
Yeah.
it's actually quite a deadly disease for a lot of people still.
Yeah.
So I was very grateful that I was able to handball the sermon yet again to somebody. But that's why I said it to you, like, you were wondering why. It's because I've been carrying this sermon that I really want to preach
Yeah,
for
wow.
almost a year now on
Yeah.
forgiveness.
So what have you found out about it?
Well, you were just mentioning a number of things that are very key and important. So when you're looking at any topic in the Bible, you want to slice it up and look at other parts of the Bible that talk on that specific thing. So you mentioned, I think, about 4 different references. You mentioned that I think pretty much all from the Gospels, but you did mention, I think, one later in the epistles. It's significant how we're told to pray, and it's in the Lord's Prayer. So you see that in Matthew and the other Gospel, I think it was Luke. The parable I was speaking on was the parable of the unforgiving servant.
Yeah.
So it's Matthew 18, and the whole chapter.
That's a good one.
Oh, it's very good. It's
insane.
It's got some depth to it, and I think my dad really helped unpack it for me when I was younger. The chapter's talking about childlike trust and the significance of forgiveness, and so the whole time you're finding out more and more about this trust and how the implications of trust will be seen through the way in which you forgive. So forgiveness is a litmus test for your trust. It reveals what you trust. And more often than not, we think we're trusting one thing when we're actually trusting something else. So that's the great thing.
You need to pull that mic out, drop it on the ground, pop it back on.
Bring a dummy mic in just to drop it.
And that's
No, that's
essentially
true.
what happens in the parable. So he does a great job setting up the listeners around that point to talk about the idea of trust. But then he really hits the nail on the head at the very end when Jesus is talking about forgiveness. Essentially, what happens is it's brought up by a question by Simon. And Simon says, to what extent should I forgive? Or how many times? How many times should I forgive?
Yeah.
And so when that happens, Jesus is really quite kind in the way that he answers the question, because he's answering it in multiple depths at once.
Yeah.
The first is, you're going to have to forgive a lot, Peter, 7 times 70. Because I think he's wondering, how many times do I forgive? Is 7 times, enough? That's a lot for one day. Flip, who are you hanging out with?
Yeah.
To have to be doing
And
that.
some new friends. You know what I'm saying?
And when I realized that it was Simon asking the question, there's 2 Simons. The first Simon of the disciples is Simon Peter. He's the kid that is always speaking first in class. He's the one that's speaking almost the dumb questions on behalf of everyone else that's too scared to ask those questions, right? He's also the one that kind of runs into things.
Yeah.
Then there's the other Simon that people often forget about, Simon the Zealot. Now, I'm not too sure. I haven't done enough research because I actually got the 2 confused.
Terrorist.
And, well, pretty much, right? A zealot.
This is Simon Peter who asks the question.
I thought it might have been. Okay. Yeah.
First to speak.
Because Simon Zealot, because I was getting confused. It was probably a good thing that I got hit with COVID, because then I was like, oh no, I think I've written some of the sermon wrong there, because I've based it off the wrong Simon. But Simon the Zealot, if it had been him, it'd be interesting, because he's got red on his ledger. He's asking, if it was him, which it isn't, to what extent should I forgive? Because how much have I been forgiven? There's an echo in there, right?
Yeah.
But Simon Peter, it's still quite interesting, actually, especially when we see how forgiveness is very important post-resurrection with Peter, with the denials, and how Jesus chooses to ask him 3 times if he loves him, because there's 3 times he was denied, because he's letting him know he's really forgiven. I know what happened.
Yeah.
And I'm still here.
Oof,
You
right.
love me, I love you more. Jesus is kind of whispering in his ear, right? So the parable, if you go backwards to Matthew 18, when he's talking about forgiveness and he's hearing who? Simon Peter asking about what? Forgiveness. He knows what's about to happen. And he's preparing himself. And Simon Peter's asking a question, and he's asking it in a careful way. He's not being too vulnerable about it, but Jesus allows that vulnerability to come out through the parable. He's not just answering the question of, how many times technically do you have to forgive? He's answering the question inside the question, which is, why is it so friggin' important to forgive? Why should we forgive? And I don't think Simon Peter's trying to get out of it. I think he's just trying to understand that significance. And the significance is it reveals what you trust. So that unforgiving parable, if you remember, that servant, he's given, an immense amount of wealth to look after, to the point where when you look at the 10, I think it's 10,000 talents, talent being, I was told originally it was 10,000 coins, but technically it's actually, it's to do with the weight, and the weight system back then, when you got to the point where it was a talent, that was the largest metric. It was an amount so heavy that you just didn't count it, because it was just too big. It was the biggest amount. So I think today, when we talk about, biggest amounts, or if we're trying to brag about something, it would be something, over
Like
the
$1
top
million.
ridiculous. Talk million or billion. That's kind of what they were talking about. So this was 10,000 times a metric that was too big and too heavy to count.
Wow. Okay.
So you're talking about almost the gross national income of a country. It was stupidly huge, which means that this guy wasn't just given a loan from a loan shark. He was given this from the king, which meant he was probably a royal servant. He was probably looking after something.
Trusted.
That's right. He was trusted with a
Very
lot.
high position.
And he stuffed it big time. Big time. He hadn't just lost, some of it. He lost all of it. And when the king was saying, all right, I'm now doing the rounds. I'm actually doing this on behalf of, not just me, but for the kingdom. I want the kingdom to have order. I'm now getting people to pay me back because I actually care about the kingdom. This is the interesting thing about the king. He's going around doing that. And so when this guy comes up and he can't pay any of it, he knows the drill. Essentially, you get forced into slaved indentured. Is that how you say the word? I forget now. But you're going into forced servitude. There's another way of talking about it. And so
you could pay
he lose everything. But the thing is, he'd never be able to pay it back. I mean, that kind of money, that kind of amount. Like, if I was to lose the gross national income of Australia, everybody, I mean, I'd have to hide in Tasmania somewhere. Like,
I think we'd have to have a new crucifixion.
Right? Oh my gosh, they'd be hunting me down. I'd be Tasmanian devil. So like I'd go extinct. It would be bad because the thing is, there's implications to that, right? That would stuff up Australia on such a huge level. There'd be new taxes brought in. Everybody would be hit by that. Now this guy's done it, right, and he's about to lose the rest of his life to slavery, but so is his family. He's also going to lose all of his property.
Everything,
Now back then, I think when people read this passage, they sometimes find it quite brutal because they're like, what the heck is this? But it's like back then, they didn't have a system of welfare that we have today. Their welfare system was primarily through slavery. They actually had to do it that way. And sometimes it wasn't necessarily bad. Sometimes it was kind of good, interestingly enough. A lot of people don't know about it.
We don't have the same idea about slavery that actually
Slavery is pretty gnarly
It's
today.
pretty
At least for the
pretty
last few centuries.
crazy.
Yeah, it's not. There were rights back then for the slave. Whether
Yeah.
they were followed or not, it's another thing. So
Yeah.
it wasn't necessarily, albeit a terribly good thing, but it could prove to be sometimes better than what it is today. Anyways, so this is what's happening to that slave. This is what's happening, with the king when he's seeing it. And then the king says, I will cancel the debt. But what's missed when that happens is the king is actually saying, I'm going to cancel the debt. In other words, I'm absorbing your debt.
Yeah.
And
That's the absorption. Yeah,
that is what forgiveness is about.
that's right.
So there's different worldviews, different ways that people define forgiveness. But the best description I've ever heard was some friends at Trinity when I was studying there, and they said, forgiveness is the absorption of the injustice that was delivered to you.
Yeah.
You're literally absorbing the injustice.
You
And
pay it within yourself.
Doesn't that make sense when some people say, I've forgiven you, and they keep on holding it against you?
Yeah,
They haven't absorbed the injustice.
they
have
haven't
they?
absorbed it.
Mm.
And isn't that a powerful picture of the cross?
Mm-hmm. Yep,
Infinite
Wow.
crimes against an eternal God.
have to
Through
be infinitely dealt with. And that's the only way. It would have had to be only God.
So the trust thing is paramount to the forgiveness.
Mm.
And there's another reason to this as well. When we forgive, I loved Keller for pointing this out. Forgiveness is always costly. Sometimes I see in movies people go, oh, you should just forgive. It's easy to do that. You don't have to carry the weight of this other person and stuff like that. When they're talking about that, they're talking about how people are forgiving out of the sense of attrition. So if I say I'm sorry to you, JL, for cutting off your dreadlocks without you looking, you'd be kind of like, okay.
I will meet you in the car park after this.
You'd be wondering why I'm saying the sorry and if, what it meant. And I'm saying, I'm sorry because I don't want to meet you in the car lot. I don't want to have these negative
So
consequences.
it's about to go
Right.
down.
Right. So that's the attrite. I'm saying sorry out of attrition.
Yeah.
Then there's contrition. JL, I'm sorry I cut your dreadlocks. I was so jealous of them. I really wanted some, and I just can't do it, with my hairdo. And also,
Still missing it.
I'm really sorry that this has impacted you. See, I'm not just saying sorry because of what I'm worried about in regards to the consequences. I'm actually saying sorry because I feel terrible about what's happened to the other person. It's more other person focused. And the Bible's very clear about contrition and attrition. These are words that come into play later on when people are trying to define what's being described in the Bible. But they're there and they're quite clear and they're quite important. So this servant in this parable was attrite.
Yeah.
He wasn't contrite. In fact,
Contrite in spirit.
right? We hear it all the time in songs, in hymns. We read it in the Bible as well in the transliteration in the English. What does it mean? What's the difference between a heart that is got the posture that's facing towards the cross, that's kind of like, I'm ready now, not only to accept that forgiveness, but to actually show that kind of forgiveness. What's this dude do? He doesn't show it.
Ain't nobody got time for that. Man's got to live.
He strangles the next guy
That's
he
right.
sees, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
You owe me a month's wages. I'm going to strangle you. Yeah. He's just literally been paid off the rest of his loan, all of his bills for the foreseeable future. Why is he trying to get money? Isn't that interesting?
Good question.
That was the question that my dad asked me that caught me out years and years ago when I was younger. And that's what stumbled me upon this idea of what forgiveness means and how significant it is.
I propose we do a book club.
You
Tim
said
Keller.
you're already a part of 3.
Yeah, I want more.
Calm down.
I want more. I kind of want to read this book together that Keller's just released.
Oh, the forgiveness one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it'll be quite good. He did a very, very good job of explaining it in a number of his sermons so far, especially the prodigal God. That was just genius.
Yeah.
But the idea of this servant and it's a really good cautionary tale, not just for others, but primarily to Peter. It wasn't just simply to answer his vulnerable question, it was to encourage him as well and to warn him at the same time. If you are only a trite, if you are only sorry because of self-interest, if you're only sorry because of what this thing is going to affect you in, then you're missing the bigger purpose. You're not really accepting forgiveness, and therefore you will not forgive others. If you're contrite, then you will. But even if you're contrite, it's costly.
Yes.
There comes a point that you're going to forgive someone in your life where they've done something possibly worse than what you've ever done in yours.
Absolutely.
So Simon Peter, he might not have read on his ledger like the other Simon, but he's done things too. Takes off a guy's ear, like literally a few weeks after this point, right? Or a few months. So he's got some violence in him.
He makes sure to sin so that he could get forgiven bigger, doesn't he?
Oh my God.
But it begs the question: when do we come across a point where we're forgiving someone for something that we think is just too much? Because it takes, if it's costly to forgive, then if you get to a point where you're just like, I don't know if I can pay that price. How do I forgive someone that's done that? That will take more than what I have the capacity to do. And that's why the trust is so important, because it talks about our reserves. What is our strength? What is our capacity? Well, it's going to take more than what we can give. So we have to fall on our reserves, which is what? The cross.
Yeah.
We don't forgive in our own strength. That's the beauty of the Christian
Forgive
life.
because we've been forgiven. And how much have we been forgiven, really?
It adds so much more to that sentence, to that verse, to that truth.
Yeah.
We are forgiven so much, which means that we have the capacity to forgive more than what we'd ever expect to be able to.
In Christ we do, yeah.
So there's something powerful, I think, going on with forgiveness. That's why I've been thinking about it for so long.
That's so good.
Thoughts, Nate?
It's difficult to do. As Matt just talked about.
Has there been times where you found it difficult to forgive?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Tell us
No
about that.
hesitation there.
Yesterday.
Is that why you're missing some of your dreadlocks today?
What?
Well,
You're
look,
missing
somebody somewhere is gonna get a hurt real bad. No, I'm not missing no dreadlocks.
Forgiveness. Jeez. That's interesting. I never thought about that story in that way in a long time, especially that question of, so why did he ask for more money from the other guy? I think just because recently I've been like at work going through some of the vicious circle, the therapy stuff with some of the kids, and talking about how hurt just starts the chain of anger and resentment and bitterness and stuff. And then talked about the idea of like belonging is one of those steps to get out of it, to get out of that cycle of constantly being resentful and hateful. And as I was speaking on that, and obviously sharing, best to kind of teach from your experience and share, especially with therapy thing. And it caught me off guard, just realizing how, as a kid, as an 8-year-old kid, there was a lot of resentment and hurt that happened when I was like, because my parents busy in church doing all sorts of things. And so there was that level of hurt that I didn't really acknowledge at that time. And then I was always wondering why I was looking back on like teenage years being resentful and hating Christianity and hating church. And I was always uncomfortable whenever my parents prayed, because it was like, yeah, you're so busy with church that you don't even care about us, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it the other day. I was just teaching kids about like learning to build your, acknowledging some of the stuff that's happened in the past to kind of helpfully get you to think, believe, and feel differently about certain things that trigger you. And it was just interesting when you talk about forgiveness. It's just like sometimes there's so much meaning we attach to certain things, certain people, certain situations that are so embedded that it does become our truth. Over time, it becomes an
Achoo over there.
bless you.
That's so true.
Blessed to be a blessing.
It becomes our it becomes our truth and
Yeah.
becomes our kind of narrative and story that we believe in. And it
Oh.
literally, like, sometimes we don't realize we have to forgive or things that we need forgiving for or whatever, because from my own personal journey about forgiveness, it's like, it's so hard to kind of like let go, have an open hand posture about things that, like, no, this is my right, like, I need this. This actually helps me make sense of the world. Because once you let go of that, it's like, oh, okay, like, it's not as
Feel
sturdy.
naked.
Yeah, feel naked. But also, it's like, it's my routine, my structure, my discipline, my point of view on about how the week goes, even down to the minute how a day goes, is totally flipped. Because now it's like that one thing that I held on to kind of a vantage point to swing or to walk or to kind of come back to make sense of things. It's like, I hate you, and come back. It's like, because of this, like, we go. So for me, forgiveness and the idea of letting go is a big thing, because that's something I know I've realized as I've grown older over time is a lot harder to do.
The
It's a
older
lot-
you get,
the older you get, it's a lot harder to let go of certain things where you've kind of like put in place in your thinking. Put in
do you
place.
think that's because we have strong, like the stories that we tell ourselves about what happened?
Oh yeah,
have
it's
just are solidifying, and
the stories you've solidified, but also it's the fact that not only is it, I believe, the story that I've told to myself, but now I'm constantly comparing that story to everyone else's story.
comparing it. What do you mean?
As in, like, my certain upbringing, the way my parents have taught me, the way I've kind of navigated my 20s, and the way I've kind of started believing certain ways about the Bible, and
Yeah.
how I think what my purpose is and my identity. Like, and now, instead of trying to just examine that and try to rejig and reshape that and just transform that in certain ways and be renewed by my mind, I'm just on the outside, just comparing it, like, does this hold up to this? Should I change? Should I move? Because I'm trying to now protect that rather than try to look in. And forgiveness comes knocking at the door and it's like, dude, you just need to actually let go of control. And I'm like, nah, I'm good. So forgiveness is hard because it asks you who's actually in control, you or God. Like, talking about the idea of trust you were alluding to, like, because when you're talking about forgiveness, there's an element of you that you actually have to let go. Because I've been on both sides where I've forgiven, but because I wanted to avoid a consequence. I've forgiven because I'm trying to keep myself safe. I'm trying to put up a wall. I'd rather just, let's just leave it there, move on, not deal with it. Terrible with conflict sometimes. And so the idea of actually potentially opening yourself to more hurt, potentially opening yourself to more damage, there's a level of trust there that you need to build. Like, you need to have deep roots. So, like, I think, especially when I talk to teenagers and catching up with friends and talking to them, like, teenagers, even though they can be at times annoying and loud and do all their stuff, there's a level of flexibility. There's a level of, I guess, that neuroplasticity thing where it's like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, if they hang around long enough in a safe environment, they'll change. Whereas with adults, it's like, I can pick and choose my environment. I can pick and choose my thing. If I don't like you, I'll move to another group. If I don't like seeing this, like with the algorithms on YouTube and stuff, it's like, I'll go down this rabbit hole because it comforts my thoughts, comforts my thing. And I can't remember what it's technically called, but I was just reading about the, you know, how some like neural pathways in your brain, how when you sleep, there's that, I can't remember the name of it, but like when you sleep, there's your brain kind of heals itself, or like there's like, can't remember what it's called, but when you wake up the new day, basically, all those things are kind of
like
what
a clean slate.
a cleansing,
sort of
cleansing
Yeah.
almost. And the first thing that hits your brain the next day is kind of what you're starting to rewire and do, your brain. And it's funny to think like sometimes morning you wake up, the importance of actually scripture, the importance of actually worship, the
Yeah.
importance of stuff like that,
Yeah.
which was one of the practical things I've figured out about myself, that sometimes I need to do that a lot more, because
Yeah.
to rewire and rethink and repent of things is like to actually be more open to trusting God and to be open to like, you might get hurt if you kind of open yourself with a contrite heart to the situation, and it might suck for a while, but forgiveness, like you said, is powerful. If it's like one of the cornerstones for us, so it's like died, rose again, like flipping, it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
But it's so easy to talk about. It's so hard to kind of like sit in the moment and be like, okay, like this is gonna suck huge. Because I was thinking about when you talked about tattoos and stuff, and I was thinking about the meaning for why I've got fearless love written on the inside of my arm. It literally there was that moment like years ago when it was a huge, like basically the context of it is I was praying for God to provide like a wife and blah, 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 and all that stuff, and literally answered everything. And
Wow.
then literally maybe a year or two into it, like felt this overwhelming sense of God saying to let go. And I'm like, what the
snap.
flip, bro?
Oh, snap.
And so literally, ugly cried, everything happened. And I'm standing there in the apartment kitchen, just wondering what the heck. And then it's overwhelming, like this annoyance and kind of anger, but also this, like, all right, dude, I'm flipping, trusting you, right? I didn't say flipping, I said something worse, but I'm trusting you right now. Like this is going to work out. And still like walked into a cathedral in the city, just sitting there like talking to God, and this overwhelming sense of him saying, just wait. I'm like, okay, what the hell does it mean? So that journey of going through that, because there was such an openness and there was kind of like I seeing God work, but then somewhere along the journey, like forgiveness has kind of been like, I've somehow wanted to start taking control.
Yeah.
And I think to be able to be more open to forgiveness, you've got to actually allow those moments of like potential hurt and pain to happen, because if you have a hard heart, like it's not easy to mold and shape and be formed by scripture, especially, and by just prayer. Like it's one thing that we forget. Like we have access to the flipping creator of the universe.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. And so the importance of forgiveness for me is like, because it unlocks a lot of softness that we've kind of hardened ourselves, because there's chaos of the world. You can kind of think you're blocking it out, but literally you're actually hardening yourself rather than blocking things out.
Yeah. A hardened heart is indiscriminate as well. That's the thing, is you can't harden your heart and close it off and think, oh, I'll only open them for my people. Like it doesn't care.
It breaks down our perception.
Yeah.
Because if you're very busily being defensive of the world, or just one person in front of you, which feels like the world at the time, then what you're doing is you're not being able to see past those defenses as much.
Yeah.
And it starts to color everything that the other person is doing, to the point where you will very easily misunderstand everything. And it'll start to reconfirm the position that you already think that they're in, and the position that you think you're in, and it will also further justify, further validate that narrative that you have as well. Everybody does this, and everyone leaves, or everyone, and so it just becomes overwhelmingly bad. It's how bitterness is born.
It is.
It's such a powerful thing, I think, forgiveness. What it does is that it changes the feedback loop.
Oh, that's good.
You're not in a static or doing the same thing. I'm being exhausted by this thing, being exhausted by the people around me. What it does is it actually changes the state of play to the point where it's a dynamic feedback loop. It's a positive feedback loop. It's moving. It's now going somewhere. And that's all good theology. Good theology is all practical.
Keep talking. Keep talking, I'll be back. I'm just going to see if we can extend my time.
Oh.
Oh, okay.
Oh. Oh, it is
Oh,
true.
only it's 11. Okay.
Jeez.
Yeah, fair enough.
That flew. I mean, I did get here late,
No, it's fine.
but that flew. I got here at what, 9:30 or
9:20 something, 9:25, 30.
gosh.
Yeah. No, we've been talking really well, and it's a good topic.
Mm.
Yeah. What are your insights on that whole? Because you come from the position where you do a lot of therapy and a lot of counseling,
Yeah.
and you were talking about couples therapy or something, and just
Mm.
different places where you've seen forgiveness work. From your counseling perspective, practically, and even just neurologically, maybe, or just that sort of scientific level, how does forgiveness or something similar to it actually shape a person if they do or do not?
There's a very old psychoanalyst that used to have this phrase called the basic fault, and he was talking about fault lines. That there'll come a point in the therapy when you're working with a client that they'll fall back to a position they once were in. So, they finally started doing some growth, and then what the heck? Oh, they're back to this thing. Everybody does it as well. So he thought that was interesting. And he called it the basic fault because it was essentially, and this was before neuro psychology, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
before neuroscience. And so they didn't have the data to back it up, but he noticed it because of the other kinds of data, his patients, and what the phenomena was that he was witnessing before him. And it was to do with the fact that we all struggle with changing our habits because they've become so habitual for such a long time, right? So we go back to that fault line, or to put it in neuroscience. And there's a lot that I don't know about neuroscience. There's a lot that I'm being taught, which I'm really grateful for by my friends and by some of the professional developments they go on. But the idea is, and it's becoming a big thing.
Extend time.
Oh, we can't. Okay, we should finish.
We should finish.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
We'll finish this conversation in the car
we'll
park.
finish
All the
this
listeners will have to
conversation in the
listen
car
in
park.
next time.
Everybody else, make up your own minds with your truth.
No.
Oh, that's not a bell. That's just a.
Did last time, did we have like 2 hours?
Yeah.
Wow. That just felt